Hello, everyone. I'm Helen McGrath, LLG's Executive Director of Policy and Governance, and I'm joined this week by Dennis Hall, our Bulletin Editor. Hello, Dennis.
Hi, Helen.
What have you got for us this week? What we're going to be talking about?
Well, I thought we'd take a look at this topic that's just been in the news about rejuvenating our high streets and the latest government announcement on that.
Hmm.
I think, we can all agree, can't we, that many of our high streets are in a sorry state. Changing shopping patterns, online buying, out of town retail, and COVID-19, all of them have had an effect. But government has just announced a package of measures to address the problems of high streets following extensive consultations. The proposals are novel, they involve local authorities front and centre, and they're highly controversial in several respects. And you're bound to be asked how to implement them. So we'll look at all of these proposals today. So Helen, what's been announced?
Well, from what I've read, that basically new powers will come into effect this summer to help communities take back control of their high streets and revive empty shops to accelerate regeneration. And of course, we all know, don't we, from our experience of being in certain high streets, how kind of depressed and sad, and that there's been like a loss of community hub in some areas. So new powers for communities to regenerate high streets and fill empty shops will be enforced by the summer. The government announced this on the 14th of May. High street rental auctions. Now, that's a new local authority power to combat high street vacancies, which will allow leaders who know their area best to take control of empty properties and rent them out to local businesses that want to use them. So the new powers will help councils, the government says, level up their high streets and tackle wide-ranging issues stemming from prolonged high street emptiness, which has, let's be honest, been exacerbated by the pandemic, such as low footfall, which has led to struggling businesses, increased unemployment, and of course, antisocial behaviour, Dennis.
Mm. And of course, some more detail on this, Helen. Where a high street shop has been empty for over a year, high street rental auctions will also allow the leaders to step in and auction off a rental lease for up to 5 years. Auctions will take place with no reserve price, giving local businesses and community groups the maximum opportunity to occupy space on the high street at a competitive rate. So that's the plan. And to help get this high street rental auction scheme up and running as soon as possible, the government also announced a new trailblazer program so it can help by working with a number of communities who are keen to lead the way in quickly implementing these new powers. And there's money behind the announcements too. There'll be a £2 million support fund to help them, and other local authorities also will be involved in getting started across the summer. But here's the question: why do you think these things have been announced, and why at this time, do you think?
Well, we are coming towards a general election, aren't we? And I think people's local community is obviously really important to them. I mean, the government website talks about COVID-19 and it's basically its acceleration of changes in the behavior of shoppers. For example, a greater uptake of online retail has left a real issue on many of the high streets, and vacancy ruins the look and feel of an area. You've got boarded up empty shops that then become a target for vandalism, graffiti, and social behaviour. And taken together, the economic and physical decline caused by high street vacancy entrenches, they say, economic underperformance and undermines pride in place, which I think is right, with more derelict high street shops and disused town centre spaces. Now, there's some data from the local data company found it is the local data company found that nationally in the first quarter of 2023, 1 in every 7 high street shops were closed. 1 in every 7.
Staggering.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's other evidence as well that vacant properties have been empty for more than 2 years, and over 1 in 5 have been empty for more than 4 years. 1 in 5, Dennis. So, when you think about that, what other elements are the government looking to do to address the high street in relation to new powers that they're bringing in?
It's interesting because they link all of this to antisocial behaviour, and the
Mm.
government is committed to introducing the high street rental auctions and high street accelerators, as they call them, in its 2023 anti-social behaviour action plan. And this new high streets package complements the government's levelling up package as well. So they're all linked together. And
Yeah.
that currently totals over £15 billion to improve every part of the UK by 2030. So that's their overall financial input as they've declared so far.
Mm.
Now, this funding includes £1.5 billion that's part of the long-term Plan for Towns initiative. And that's a UK-wide programme empowering residents in, they say, 75 towns to play a key role in developing their town's future. And the government say further, they say they're also supporting the High Streets Designation Review and Improvement Bill. That doesn't trip off the tongue very easily,
No.
but give you some points for getting there. Well, this bill will ensure councils routinely develop and publish improvement plans for their high streets. And that sounds like a good idea to me.
Does.
And then they've also said that there's a pilot scheme, and this will give 10 designated areas a share in £5 million to breathe new life and greenery onto their high streets, planting new trees, green walls and green pocket spaces, and improving adjacent parks. And the 10 local authorities taking part in the programme will receive this £500,000 each to entice, their words, each to entice residents back to the shops, working in partnership with local people and community organisations to create new environments. But you know, Helen, the question to me is this enough? And given that there's an election coming up, what really do these announcements actually mean? Will it all work? With an election due imminently, many will be wondering whether this will end up as no more than a manifesto pledge in the forthcoming general election. The announcements have come very late, it seems to me, perhaps too late to be effective during the lifetime of this particular government.
Well, I don't know if the 10 local authorities have been identified and published yet, Dennis, but I would be personally interested to see whether there's a north-south divide on that at all. Because historically there's always been a lot of criticism, or indeed where these targeted areas are, if I was going to be slightly cynical.
Well, I think you're right. I think there is a mention of some towns being part of an initiative, but I can't remember whether it was the pilot scheme or these other initiatives. It's a bit confusing. But I think you've highlighted there one of the concerns I've had about this government's whole approach to the funding of local government and these initiatives. It's always piecemeal. It's always sporadic. It's never systemic. And I think government expects better than to have to compete for funding in these competitions. Many commentators, particularly those involved with financial issues, have raised the question of whether this is the real and proper way in which schemes should be funded, or should there be a much wider long-term plan for financing things like this? And in the end, will it work in this sporadic piecemeal fashion? I'm cynical about that, quite frankly, and this is just my personal view. I have whole doubts about the approach to the financing of the levelling up programme.
Well, I think just in terms of the actual intention of what the government's trying to do here, I think those who are old enough to remember, and I can't remember the actual decade it happened in, but New York, I remember at one point, quite a few years ago now, decades ago, in fact, had implemented a zero tolerance approach to the sort of crime and disorder and antisocial behaviour, and that really was terribly successful in rejuvenating certain areas that were, complete no-go zones. So, really, it's not just about improving the high street, but they need to work. I would say the government needs to work in tandem with the law enforcement agencies in order to get that right as well. Otherwise, you can smarten everything up as much as you want, but it's not going to make a difference, is it? Unless it's a coordinated approach.
Well, indeed, I think actually my memory may well go beyond yours. I think it does. It was Mayor Rudy Giuliani who's been in the news quite recently, and I think it was when he was mayor of New York in the 1980s. And frankly, to his credit, then it was a multi-agency approach. I think this is the thing that they did. They recognized that antisocial behavior wasn't just a matter for the police or for the enforcement agencies, and they took a citywide approach to dealing with what were in effect
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Dennis. On that note, you can get coverage
Yep.
of many more items from the bulletin and by listening to the Grapevine podcast, also available on Spotify. So it's goodbye from me.
And from me too. Bye now.